My name is Mike Kinman. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the rector here at All Saints Church. It is wonderful to have you here at the Rector's Forum. If you are new or visiting us this morning, would love to be kept up to date on future events at All Saints Church. There are green contact sheets near both doors, and we'd love it if you'd take a moment and give us your contact information. Welcome to everyone. Turn and wave at the camera, folks, to wave at everyone who is streaming with us from all over the country and all over the world. In fact, including our guest this morning is streaming with us. At all times, we put our faith into action at All Saints Church. And it's an important piece of who we are and what we do. And every week we choose one thing to do as a community to show our commitment to justice in the world. This week we are asking everyone to sign a letter to your member of the U.S. House of Representatives, thanking them for their support of what is called the Bipartisan Background Checks Act of 2019. This is an expansion of background checks. It's a small step, but frankly, that's what we're getting right now at best for gun safety and gun control is small steps. And so every time our legislators do something good, we want to pat them on the back, know that we are behind them 100%, and encourage them to take that next step that will somehow, someday, lead us to some sort of sanity in gun policy here in this country. So please, please, please go to the action table in the colonnade. We got everything sort of in our rain area today. Go to the action table before you leave and sign that letter. As always, it is so many things that keep All Saints going and thriving. It is the love of God lived out in this community. It is the Holy Spirit. It is the labors of everyone who comes in orbit in this place. And it is also your generosity financially. And so for those of you who have pledged and given for 2019, thank you. If you haven't pledged yet for 2019, we would love it if you would do so. Our vestry meeting this Tuesday, we're going to be looking at the budget. And so we would love to get those pledges in. For all of you who are streaming us online, it's super easy. There's a button that says donate, and you just click on it, and you can either make a gift or it'll take you to a pledge card. And just know that we want All Saints to be a place where all of us are free to offer our whole selves in love, and that is everything about us, and knowing that when we do, we become just something amazing as a community living out that love. So thank you very much. We have folks coming in right now. I want us to get going because I don't want to lose any chance here. Can we get Michelle up on the screen? Yay! See, okay, I did what I'm not supposed to do, which is when I do this, you see the side of my head. So I'm going to try to talk to her. Natter's told me I've got to talk to you here. And so I'm going to introduce you. And many of you know Michelle LeClair, a longtime friend and part of the All Saints community. And an extraordinary person who has in this book, Perfectly Clear, Escaping Scientology and Fighting for the Woman I Love, just told an extraordinary story. And I got to tell you, this was more than just a book I couldn't put down. I got to tell you what I did with this book. I started reading it last Friday, and I was so entranced by it that when I had to go out and leave and run some errands, I actually downloaded the audiobook so I didn't have to stop reading it, so I could continue to listen to it while I was driving around town. It is an amazing and in some ways terrifying story. It is a story of courage and hope. But mostly it's a story that I'm going to let Michelle tell you because it is her story and she's best at telling it. So can we give Michelle LeClair, live from Atlanta, a big All Saints welcome.
Hi, everybody.
So Michelle, welcome. It is wonderful to have you here. We look forward to the time when you can be here with us in person again, you and Tina. Really, for people who haven't read the book, can you just set the stage? Just sort of what's your elevator speech about what the book is about and what made you decide to write it?
Well, I think the elevator speech is House of Cards meets Scandal, and it's my story. So I think that's part of it. But you know, it is about my journey into Scientology. It is about my escape from Scientology, and it is about finding myself again and finding freedom through the woman I love, who many of you know very well, which is Tina.
That's wonderful. And let's just sort of go to the beginning. You start at the beginning talking about your family and particularly your mother as how you got into the Church of Scientology. Can you just give us tell that story of how you got into the Church of Scientology?
Sure. So I grew up in Oklahoma, and we lived a very normal life in Oklahoma. And it was not until we moved to California that my mother was introduced to Scientology. And she was not searching for it. She started working for a management consulting company out of Glendale called Sterling Management. And Sterling Management works with individual practitioners like dentists and ophthalmologists to teach them how to market. They are one of the largest front groups to the Church of Scientology, and she didn't know that. I was on my way to the American University of Paris, and where I had been accepted, and got sucked up in a summer job at Sterling, and Mom started getting into Scientology, and she was my best friend, and so I followed suit and gave up my plans to go to college, and spent the next 20 plus years in Scientology.
So you said something really extraordinary just then, which is that you were on your way to Paris to the American University, and just over the course of a summer job, you were convinced not to go to Paris, but to stay here and work for this firm. Can you just talk about what made that at the time seem just so compellingly like the right decision?
Well, I think, look, we're in a great place to get deep, right? So,
yeah, please.
I think what happens is, at least for me, I was grappling with my own sexuality at that time. I was scared and nervous at the thought of going to Paris. I had worked so hard through high school, and my dream was coming true, but I was scared to death. And so I think that there are a lot of us that are in that situation, but especially at 17 years old. At 17, I didn't have a mother who said, let me hold your hand all the way through and get you to college. My mother was young when she had me, and she was growing up right along with me. And so I think she was scared to also have me go. And at Sterling, they really said, look, you are going to learn more here than you're going to learn at any university, which is what every 17-year-old wants to hear. You never really want to go to college. They start throwing money at you. They give you safety and friends. And what happens is that your ego starts getting stroked. And, that is a big issue for somebody who had moved from Oklahoma to California. I had very few friends. I was trying to figure myself out, and I was scared to death. And then all of a sudden, I have this group who everyone's happy all the time. Everybody seems to be making a lot of money. And I had the world being offered to me at that time. So you mix being very naive with fear-based, and then the ego and money. And it was a boiling pot. And I really realized at that point, I had said this to you, Mike, the other day, there are a lot of 17 and 18-year-olds who don't buy into that. There are 17 and 18-year-olds who say, you know what, I'm going to go save the world. I'm going to go on a mission, and it's scary, and they go. Sadly, it was the moment that I didn't listen to my gut and that light inside, and I listened to my head and my ego, and I got sucked down a very scary path.
One of the first relationships you talk about, and I swear I'm not going to give away the whole book because we really want people to read it, but one of the first relationships you talk about is there was a man that you were paired with, that you had regular meetings with, and sort of helped work to create that safety. And then also, but at the same time, you found that he was just really gathering information about you. Can you just talk a little about that process of incorporation?
Well, I think in anybody who's in a religion is searching for some answer. So, Scientology combines, they're so anti-psychiatry, which is such a joke because it really is like being in session with a psychiatrist. They ask you very personal questions about yourself, and you believe that they are there to help you. Really, what they're doing is they write down every detail of what you say, and it goes into a folder. And a lot of the times they make it even bigger because they're trying to write down quick, you're going over some incident that happened in your life, and what's happening is that they are building the cement to keep you there, because you are divulging your deepest, darkest secrets, your greatest pains, your greatest fears to somebody that you trust implicitly. So when you do start to question things, those are held against you.
Well, and then the other thing you talked about was holding these cans that,
Yeah.
like, literally. I mean, this is for an organization that is opposed to psychiatry. Like, they understand brain chemistry pretty well.
Yeah.
Talk about like what happened, like when you were talking and holding these cans.
Well, so one thing that I've read since I've left Scientology, which is very interesting to me, is this e-meter that they talk about. So you hold these cans in your hands, and there are these electrodes that are attached to a meter. And that meter is being read by what they call an auditor, which is defined as one who listens. Really, it's one that's trying to get junk on you. And so what happens is there's a tiny bit of electricity that's running through your body. And what I've read from psychiatrists, from people who study this, is that that tiny bit of electricity is actually creating an opiate-like state. So here you are in session for hours. This is not 1 hour and then the session is over. You could be in session for 5 hours, for 10 hours, maybe get a quick bathroom break. So you have this little bit of electricity that's running through you, and you feel like you could conquer the world. It has nothing to do with what Scientology is doing. You're sitting there talking about yourself, and you literally are on a high. And so look, when you first start out with it, it's weird. And the people that follow their gut and say this is strange and something is not right are the people that are smarter than I was, and they're not there. But when they teach it to you, they do this thing where they say, hold the cans, and somebody says, okay, I'm going to pinch your arm while I'm holding the cans. And they show you the meter. So they pinch your arm, and all of a sudden you see the needle on the meter kind of do this, like make this move. And then they say to you, okay, now watch the meter. And you're holding the cans, and they say, now think about the pinch. And all of a sudden you see the meter move. And it takes that split of a second for you to be interested. Okay, wait, how is this happening, and what is this about? And it's that simple.
So one of the things that just struck me most, and we talked about this a couple days ago, is the power relationships. And as I was going through the book and reading it and hearing this story, the similarities of the story that you were telling of your relationship with the Church of Scientology, it seemed to go perfectly also. You were telling the story of your first marriage, which was an abusive relationship, and it just, the whole thing, all of them were just this physics of abusive relationship, in how the abuser is able to control their victim's way of thinking in ways that, like, people who are outside the relationship are thinking, I don't understand why she stays, and like, what is she doing? And yet when you're in that relationship, you've got this rationale that just makes it all seem, well, rational. So can you talk about that and just sort of why you stayed and about that image of the abusive relationship? Does that resonate?
Look, I think there are a lot of us in the world that have abusive relationships that we're dealing with, right? It could be narcissism, it could be physical abuse, it can be in a company. So the problem is that we are always trying to figure out, how do we deal with it? When you first get involved in the Church of Scientology, the first thing they teach you is that every single situation that happens to you in your life is your fault. And you somehow, some way pulled it in, and therefore you have to better yourself so that you can get better control of the people that you choose. The problem is that if you're being wronged by another Scientologist, they are constantly saying to you, well, what did you do to pull that in? What did you do to create it? Well, isn't that kind of what we do to ourselves anyway, right? You know, look, L. Ron Hubbard knew how to mess with our minds. Take our greatest vulnerabilities, our greatest fears, and let us use them against our own self. And so instead, we go internal all the time, and we are taught how to second guess ourselves. So in my relationship, in the very beginning, it started out really bad, and I went to the church immediately. Well, what the church played into with me is I had a mother that had been married 4 times. I had made a commitment to this person. So was I starting to become like my mother? And what did I do to pull that in? Because I wasn't providing my wifely duties. And so you start to get that used against you, and it's a very painful thing.
Yeah, and you know, I see that. We see that. We've all seen it in other. It's not just Scientology. It's all these other organizations that are fundamentalisms of all kind that say anything about your goodness and lovability are conditional. And the one thing that strikes me as you talk about that is just the utter lack of any concept of grace in that.
Yeah.
And you get used to that. And I would imagine, you tell me if this is right, you get used to that, and then part of you just thinks, well, this is just the way it's supposed to be.
Well, look, the church is very good about bringing people up inside of the Church of Scientology, right? There's like this whole generation. The people that are running the church are very young outside of the top executives. So you have a group of people that are very naive, and they're taught at a young age. People are mean in Scientology. I mean, on the outside, they're always smiling and seem so wonderful and great. But Leah Remini tells it the best on her show. You know, Leah's done a great job at exposing what Scientology has been doing. And, you know, she really shows how you are taught not to have emotion. So you're very critical of other people. We write reports on each other. To me, it is no different than a dictator that we all know of well named Hitler. Mm-hmm. That is the life you live in Scientology. I never once had a very intimate talk with a girlfriend of mine. Mm-hmm. I couldn't say to any best friend, I think I'm gay. Mm-hmm. And I'm really in pain, and I'm really hurting, and I really need help. I didn't have grace. I didn't have the grace of somebody putting their hand on me and saying, Michelle, it's okay. Like, we love you anyway. And I wasn't giving that grace to others. Luckily, the church has very few members. And that is one thing we have to remember, is this is about exposure. So the more that you guys talk about this stuff, the more that people that are listening let their kids know if something is not right, if it does not feel right, it is not right. Mm-hmm. And if they had the magic secret, which they believe they have, to the rest of the universe, everybody would be signing up for it, and it wouldn't be a secret.
Well, and so that gives me just the perfect way to sort of turn to what's really the heart of the book, and this book is a love story. And it is about the power of love. And you said, well, you didn't have grace. You didn't have that person who could say, no, you're wonderful where you are in Scientology. And yet you found that person. You found each other in Tina, and you give her another name in the book. And what strikes me is that you and the love that you found in each other were each other's liberation. That it wasn't just that she was there for you, you were there for her, getting out of a relationship that she needed to. So can you talk about what is it like to discover love and grace and try to learn to trust it out of such an environment?
Well, that's the good that has come out of this story, right? I mean, look, anyone who hasn't read the book or who has read the book,
Read it.
there's so much more to this, and it gets deep and detailed and difficult. But the beauty that has come out of this is that love did save me, and I think that's one thing we have to all remember, is that if we can guide ourselves with love, it will bring us to truth for sure. And Tina was that for me. I mean, look, I hope that I would have left the church at some point in time. I hate calling it the church.
Yeah.
I wish I would have left the cult at some point in time. All Saints is a church. So I think that it's important that we do follow love in our life, because she gave me the strength, and it was not overnight, and it was slow, but I started realizing, oh my God, here's this person who does not judge me, who doesn't care what I do for a living, who loves me for everything I am. She made me kinder. She made me a better mother. She made me a better person. And I hope in return I did the same for her. But yeah, she is what allowed me to see perfectly clear.
Yeah, and then what happened, what I saw is when that love started capturing your heart and giving you courage and strength, what I got out of the book is that what Scientology chose to use as its weapon against that love, in part, was shame.
Oh yeah.
And it became this face-off between shame and love. And that was this amazing part of this story, was love conquering shame. But you had to get to that point where you were no longer afraid of shame. So can you talk some about that struggle?
That's a great point. I think I'd been put down so, but look, I was a dichotomy, right, of all these different sides and angles. When you looked at me, I was an extremely successful woman who was married, had tons of money, had the great life, and had the children, and I had a smile on my face all the time. But inside, I was dying, and I hated my life, and I was scared, and I didn't know how to get out of it. When I met Tina, I had luckily at that time, I had already been divorced. So I feel like my kids finally gave me the strength to leave after, 12 years of trying to get out of that. And I literally had to write a check. I started figuring out the church's way of doing things. And I realized that I was at the place monetarily that I could pretty much write a check for anything I wanted, and I wanted a divorce. And if that meant that it was going to cost me hundreds and thousands of dollars to get it, then that's what I did. So that was kind of my first little tiny inch of looking at the church and saying, okay, wait a minute, I get it. You're all about money and you're all about relationships. So I need to play this back on you. When Tina walked into my life, I saw this woman who was so authentic. She made no excuses for who she was. She was not shamed about her life or anything she was. I would watch her walk into a room or meet somebody, and she was the center of attention, and not in a way that the church liked it, but because she was good and happy and people wanted to be around her. And she really started to teach me that it's in here. It is in here. And what is in here is that beautiful light that God touched the moment we were born inside of us. And when we let that shine, everyone wants to be around it. And I started realizing that she was allowing me to find my way into shining my own light, and that we both shined brighter together. And so I went very quick. Like some of our friends laughed because they were like, "Girl, once you came out, there was no turning back for you." And I used to say, I was like, "Can I please tattoo lesbian on my forehead?" Um, because look, I never looked back, and but I really thought that I could bring the Church of Scientology into the 21st century, and I was going to be the rainbow flag waving Scientologist, but I was wrong.
Yeah. Well, and then after you got out, I mean, you found your way to All Saints, and I want to give some chance for other people to ask questions, but the first piece of this just fascinated me, which is, because I knew that you found All Saints, and it's why we have this wonderful connection. After that experience with something that calls itself a church, oh my gosh, like, why would you ever go to any church again? Like, what drew you to All Saints? And then can you talk about what the relationship with this congregation has meant, and what's that part of the story?
So it was very interesting. So one day, Tina and I flew in from New York, and I'm actually Skyping from New York right now. We had flown in from New York, and it was a Sunday, and we'd flown in early. And she said, "Look, I want to go to church. I haven't been to church in a long time." And that word just made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. And I was like, "Well, you do whatever you want, but I'll just sit in the car and I'll wait for you to come out." So when we drive up to All Saints, I'm looking at All Saints, and I looked at Tina and I said, "Oh my God, it's so familiar to me." And she said, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah, it's so familiar. This is just amazing." And I said, "Well, I'll walk in and I'll stand at the back." And she said, "Okay." And she's never pushed me to do it. And so she walked in and did her thing. And I was standing there, and the songs were familiar. And I literally had to walk out because I was like, it's like deja vu. So I called my dad, and I was talking to my dad outside of the church, and my dad had never been in Scientology. And I said, "Dad, you wouldn't guess where I'm standing." And he said, "Where?" And I said, "Oh, I'm standing at an Episcopal church." And he said, "Oh, you're coming back home, are you?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Michelle, that's where you were baptized." He said, "You were in the Episcopal church until you were 4 when your mom and I divorced." And so, to me, it was God, it was serendipity. I will say this. I really struggled with my relationship with God. I was not all in at that moment. All Saints was a huge part of my journey. George and Mary and Ed and Hope, I mean, they took my hand, and I cannot tell you how many times I was on my knees crying to Ed saying, "I cannot hear God." And he would just say, "It's okay, Michelle, it's your journey, your way." And I started looking around at the people at All Saints who welcomed me with open arms. And we really feel like it's a family. I mean, it brings tears to my eyes because we miss you guys so much. And it was a true journey for me. And when I had to go through hell and back once I left the church, and I had a lot of legal issues I had to deal with, it was either Zelda that was by my side holding my hand, or it was Ed. And nobody left me. And everyone was so kind and generous, and nobody tattled on each other and was all accepting. So look, how I approach religion at this point and what works for me is that I don't think anybody has it right. I have to be at a place where I feel loved and I feel comfortable and I feel like some of it is right. And I want to give my children a place that they're loved and accepted. And I will always question religion. I will never be dogmatic or say that this is the only way again. I love tons of Buddhist quotes. I think that the Jewish religion has some beautiful parts to it. I think there's beautiful things everywhere, and I try to look at the people, and I try to make my decisions based on the actions of the groups that we are part of. and not just listen to the words.
Man, that's wonderful. We have, yeah, absolutely. We have about 8 or 9 minutes left. What I want to do is, I bet there's lots of responses and questions. Who are our microphone people? Eddie, I see you. And Eddie and Jennifer, great. Who do we have? What questions do we have? So do we, yeah, I thought over here. Yeah, okay, yeah, I thought the hand went there and the hand went away. And Susan.
Got my running shoes on.
Should I go ahead?
Please.
Okay. Yesterday I was walking past I think it's the Scientology headquarters in Los Angeles, the old Cedars of Lebanon Hospital, etc. And it was pouring down rain, so there weren't very many people on the sidewalk, and I was accosted by a very nice-looking young man from Scientology. I knew immediately because he was so well-dressed and so polite. And he asked me if I wanted a card, and I said, no, thank you. Been there, done that. I had an experience with Scientology, a brief one, 40 years ago. He said, oh, well, that's so long ago. I wasn't even born. And anyway, we've changed a lot. We discovered some ancient writings of L. Ron Hubbard, which showed us the true way, and so we've changed things. So I just wondered, is this a technique that they often use? This kind of thing, oh, well, we've changed, you should try again?
They use that about every probably 5 years at the longest. I can tell you that that sounds very familiar. You know, L. Ron Hubbard ran the church like the Navy. So that's why you see these uniforms. They don't wear them as much now because they're not socially acceptable. But everybody has to, you know, all the guys have to have the perfect short haircuts, and everybody has to be perfectly dressed and always have a smile on their face. But yeah, what happens is that you end up going through all the courses that have been released in Scientology, which will cost about $300,000 by the time that you get done with it. And then all of a sudden they say, oh, by the way, we found these ancient writings, or we had kicked somebody out of the church who took L. Ron Hubbard's writings and changed them and made them their own. So by the way, you need to go back down to the bottom of the training levels, and you need to pay us another $300,000 to go through everything. And people kick and scream and get upset about it, and then they start to get ostracized and they start to get in trouble, and you find everybody falling right back in line.
Wow, that's incredible. Susan.
Two quick
Susan
questions. One, were you living within the facilities of the Church of Scientology? And the second question is, you mentioned that when you left, there were a lot of legal ramifications. I wonder if you could expand on that a little bit.
So the first thing, I did not live within the church, but my mother did. So my mother was one of their top executives in the church. She was in international management. She lived in a disgusting dormitory with, 10 other women. My mother worked from 8 o'clock in the morning until sometimes 2 o'clock in the morning, and very little health care or food. And so my mother's had a toll on her body for what she's been put through. I didn't know that as a Scientologist. She would not tell me those things. So it's very hard to know what she went through. I lived, what I called a normal life. And, but I would go in and do courses at the church multiple times a week, or auditing. So, it's a long story to get into right now, but I will say this. When I left the Church of Scientology, no different than anybody else who has any sort of large affiliation with the church, you have to realize my clients and people that I was in touch with, I was business partners with Kirstie Alley. I was a spokesperson for Tom and Katie's silent birth for their baby. I was one of the top donors in the church. So for me to walk away and to have a mother that was in international management, they don't allow that so easy. So the first thing that they do is they start to try and investigate you and find some weak point. And this is where we have to really realize that, can you imagine as a 501c3, as a church organization, that you are spending millions of dollars on investigating people, on tracking people, on filing false reports, on hacking into their emails, on sitting outside of their house, following their children? Those were all the things that were done to me. And, sadly, they ended up having this whole false narrative about me and my business. I was investigated by the state of California. I had to fight for my life for almost 5 years. I was harmed. Clients of mine were harmed. Luckily, I can tell you that I won and everything was dismissed and I made it through by the grace of God. But it was horrific, and we were able to get a hold of in discovery, their emails, copies of IP addresses, the anonymous letters that were sent in. So they are ruthless, and they are spending millions of dollars to do what they call fair game against people like me, who they call suppressive people, which I will take that title happily if it's against the Church of Scientology.
So, yeah, Marianne, Eddie, can you get to Marianne here? And we have time for one more question, so we'll let the senior warden have at it.
It's always dangerous to talk about children, but your children were in the church for 12 years. How do you help them transition out of that?
Here's the great news. I believe somebody was watching over my children, because my children were never in the church. So, I have an 18-year-old son. So, my children were very, very young. I mean, my son was 9 years old when I left. And so he was 8 years old. He's 18 now. He maybe took one course. I don't know why. I was so busy doing my courses, and it somehow never seemed to work out because he was in school. Thank God. I left the church, left my marriage when my daughter Savannah was 1 and I was pregnant with twins. So luckily, they are all with me. They are all protected. They are strong, happy, amazing children. And they are my strength along with my love.
That is just wonderful. And thank you so much for spending time with us. We miss you. We love you. Tell Tina we miss her and love her. We hope that you can come back soon. Can we just show our express and thanks for Michelle LeClair?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm so grateful. Thank you, everybody.